Hello, everybody. My name is Paige McKenna, and this is Disease Dissected, the show where I tell you all about disease. We cover the causes, symptoms, treatments, and historical significance of ailments both well-known and super niche. On the docket for today, it's a disease that we all know and that we all love to hate. It has impacted every single one of us. We know it. Unless you're like 1 year old, then you know it. You love to hate it. It is COVID-19, the big C. Much like last week's disease, which was the flu, COVID-19 is considered an infectious disease and is also caused by a virus, hence the name, or the other common name of it, the coronavirus. If you tuned in last week, you'll know that there's a hierarchy of how diseases can be classified. Influenza has 4 different types, and you get like specific viruses down from there, like the avian flu or the swine flu. The causative agent of COVID-19 is called SARS-CoV-2. The family of viruses is called the coronavirus family, hence calling it the coronavirus, like just calling it the flu instead of its specific name like COVID-19 or the swine flu. This particular strain causes coronavirus 19 or COVID-19. The SARS part of it, the SARS in SARS-CoV-2, stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. So all those basic details out of the way, let's get into the causes. So we just covered that it's caused by the agent SARS-CoV-2. According to the Mayo Clinic, the coronavirus spreads mainly from person to person, even from someone who is infected but has no symptoms. When people with COVID-19 cough, sneeze, breathe, sing, or talk, their breath may be infected with the COVID-19 virus. If you've listened to this show before, or if you've ever taken a microbiology class, or if you're just a person who knows a bunch of random fun facts, or are a nurse like my mom, hi mom, you'll know that a virus is not considered alive because it can't survive outside of a host. That also means it can't be treated with antibiotics like you treat bacteria, or antifungals like you treat fungal infections, or antiparasitics that you treat parasitic infections with. So we'll back up a little bit and we're going to talk about the coronavirus family on a larger scale. I have a quote here from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Quote, coronaviruses are a large family of viruses that usually cause mild to moderate upper respiratory tract illnesses in humans. However, 3 coronaviruses have caused more serious and fatal disease in people. SARS coronavirus, which is SARS-CoV, which emerged in November 2002 and causes severe acute respiratory syndrome. MERS coronavirus, or MERS-CoV, which emerged in 2012 and causes Middle East respiratory syndrome, hence the MERS, and SARS-CoV-2, which emerged in 2019 and causes coronavirus, or the coronavirus 19, COVID-19, end quote. So like influenza, like we talked about last week, there have been outbreaks and different strains of coronaviruses throughout history. With the flu, you had like the swine flu and the Spanish flu, and obviously with coronaviruses, we all lived through the COVID-19 pandemic that happened 5 years ago now, which is crazy. I was doing all the research for this episode, and when the COVID pandemic happened, I was a freshman in high school, so I was like back in freshman year, back to the time where I only listened to Broadway music. Glad that I grew out of that, so was my whole family. So we'll talk about the variants of COVID-19. You might have heard of them when we were in the midst of the pandemic as a whole. All of these details are curated from Yale Medicine and are current as of September 2023. The first one that we got was the Alpha variant. It was the first of the highly publicized variants. It first appeared in Great Britain in November of 2020, and infection surged in December of that year. It soon surfaced around the world and became the dominant variant in the US, where the CDC classified it as a variant of concern. So the Alpha one, even though it's called the Alpha variant, and it seems like it was the first one, it wasn't the original strain of COVID-19. It was the first, different one. It was the first variant. You guys get it. You're smart. The Alpha variant was 30 to 50% more contagious than the initial strain, and it was found to be more deadly than the original. Moving on to the Beta variant. All of these are very just, if you know anything about the Greek alphabet, it goes alpha, beta, delta. This variant, or B1351, was identified in South Africa at the end of 2020 and spread to other countries. Experts had been concerned about its several mutations and its potential to evade antibodies. Beta was not common in the US. It was estimated to be 50% more contagious than the original strain, and there was some evidence that it was more deadly as well. So kind of a common thread for these variants is that they get more contagious and more deadly as they go on because the viruses evolved. The ones that died, obviously, and if the virus died in a person, it couldn't go on to replicate, and so it was a weaker strain. So the ones that were getting spread are the stronger ones that weren't getting killed off, or people weren't quarantining. Anyways, you guys get the picture. The next big variant was the Delta variant. It was first identified in India in late 2020, and it soon spread throughout the world, becoming what was the predominant version of the coronavirus until Omicron took its place in mid-December of 2021. Get this, it was as much as 80 to 90% more contagious in some areas of the world than the other strains. It was more severe than its predecessors, and unvaccinated individuals were more likely to be infected with Delta than they were with Beta or Alpha. Finally, the one that we kind of still hear about is the Omicron variant. Omicron and its subvariants have ranked as the predominant SARS-CoV-2 strains in the US for almost 2 years now. And remember, that data is from 2023. That website hasn't been updated since then. While the original Omicron strain is no longer circulating, Omicron subvariants are now driving most of the country's SARS-CoV-2 infections. Omicron was first identified in Botswana and South Africa in late November 2021, and cases quickly began to surface and multiply in other countries. By December of that year, Omicron was causing daily case numbers in the US to skyrocket to over 1 million. That website hasn't been updated since 2023, but that is still all pretty accurate information. The Omicron strain was considered an especially efficient spreader of the disease, but it didn't cause as severe an infection as the other 3 variants. So you could get it easier, but once you got it, it wasn't as likely to be a problem to you, which was lovely. So that's on the causes. We're going to talk about the symptoms now. I have a list from the good old Center for Disease Controls. The symptoms of COVID are fever or chills, cough, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, a sore throat, congestion and a runny nose, loss of taste or smell, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headaches, nausea or vomiting, and diarrhea. If you are thinking, wow, that sounds familiar, maybe then you listen to last week's episode because those are all pretty similar symptoms to the flu. But we all, lovingly remember what those COVID tests feel like. I remember the first time I had to get a COVID test, I thought that I could, smell colors. That thing went so far up into my brain, I swear. I felt like I had super smell powers. My sinuses were so clear after I had to take one of those. All of that to say, you can figure out if you have COVID by just taking a test. That's how you differentiate it from the flu. The emergency symptoms of COVID-19, so the ones that if you have these, then you should be going to the hospital, are trouble breathing, persistent pain or pressure in the chest, new confusion, inability to wake or stay awake, and depending on the skin tone, the lips, nail beds, and skin may appear pale gray or blue. If you have any of those emergency symptoms and you take a test, it comes back positive, then you need to be going to the hospital. If you're taking a test and it comes back positive anyways, but you're not having any of the emergency symptoms, you should be staying home. You should be staying away from others. The way you stop the spread of disease is to stay away from anybody and anything that your germs can get on. Remember that this disease is caused by the germs getting out into the world, and that's where other people get them. So the best way to prevent it is to not put those germs out into the world. We all remember the quarantines. We all remember the big long one where we all stayed home, and then the masks and the circles on the grocery store floor where we all had to stay away from each other. So we will move on now to treatments. Much like the flu, and much like the rest of the diseases that we're going to cover on the show, the best way to treat COVID-19 is to not get it in the first place. We're out there doing our best to combat the spread of the disease, wearing the mask, the social distancing, the quarantining, the limiting contact with others. Like I mentioned before, I was a freshman in high school and we just didn't come back from spring break. I think besides my immediate family members, I saw one other person from March, all the way to July. I had one friend who we were doing our college classes together, and so we would meet at the library and sit so far away from everybody else and sit typing on our laptops, writing our papers. that was just like such a crazy span of time. Oh man. Do you guys remember like the projects that we were all getting into in COVID? Like I taught myself how to sew. It was like so funny. I made like a Renaissance dress and I was so into true crime. That was like my number one thing that I was doing in COVID was watching true crime documentaries and learning how to sew. And like I mentioned, I started taking college classes because I was bored. So I was doing those online. It was a blast. Oh yeah. So we are supposed to actually be talking about the treatments, talking about distractions that we got into in COVID. I'm getting distracted talking about COVID. Anyways, the best way to treat COVID is to not get it. As time went on, we learned that the best way to not get it is to get vaccinated. Yay! Yay for modern medical technology. You guys might remember back in ye olden days of COVID when they were talking about the way that these vaccines were different from other vaccines. And it is so cool. We're going to talk about at length about these mRNA vaccines because they're just like the coolest thing I think I've literally ever heard of. So the coronavirus, I have a graphic here from the CDC that's kind of explaining how the mRNA COVID vaccines work. Give me just 1 second. Here I have it says, coronaviruses, like the ones that cause COVID-19, are named for the crown-like spikes on their surface. These are called spike proteins. These spike proteins are ideal targets for vaccines. mRNA is messenger RNA, and it's genetic material in your cells that tells your body how to make proteins. If you've taken a biology class, you'll remember we have to learn about this, and it's like super tedious. The mRNA is the one that splits the RNA in half, and then we'll carry it to other places so it can be replicated to make new RNA and DNA. So how these vaccines work. The vaccine is made of mRNA wrapped in a coating that makes delivery easy and keeps the body from damaging it. The mRNA in the vaccine teaches your cells how to make copies of the spike proteins. If you're exposed to the real virus later, your body will recognize it and figure out how to fight it off. And I just think that that is one of the coolest things that I've ever heard, because usually in a vaccine, you get a shot, whatever, and there's the actual pathogen in it. And so your body learns the pathogen, but you still have a chance to get sick because it's getting put in your body. Most of the time, it's not a live virus that's getting put in when you get a vaccine, but regardless, you still have like a little bit of a chance to get sick. With these, there's no chance that you're going to get the disease because they're not putting the disease in you. They're just giving your body the opportunity to learn what it looks like and what like they should be fighting. Even though it's like not getting injected into you, I just think it's the coolest thing. I have a quote here from the CDC, quote, "Instead, mRNA vaccines use mRNA created in a laboratory to teach our cells how to make a protein, or even just a piece of a protein, that triggers an immune response inside our bodies. This immune response, which produces antibodies, is what helps protect us from getting sick from that germ in the future." I'm going to go a little bit more into like how standard vaccines work, just so everybody can grasp how cool the mRNA vaccines are. I have a quote here from the World Health Organization. "Vaccines contain a weakened or inactive part of a regular organism or antigen that trigger an immune response within the body. It will prompt the immune system to respond much as it would have on the first reaction to the actual pathogen." Oh my gosh, so these mRNA vaccines, they don't do that. You can almost think of it as like training wheels for your cells, because they're not like sending in the actual disease for you to fight. It's just like, hey, this is what it's going to look like. Be ready for it. Oh my gosh, so cool. I have like from Pfizer. You guys know Pfizer. We'll talk about her a little bit more later. The differences between like traditional vaccines and mRNA vaccines. Traditional vaccines can take months to grow viruses in like chicken eggs, like how the flu vaccine is made. If you want to hear more about that, feel free to listen to last week's episode on YouTube by searching Disease Dissected. For mRNA vaccines, they only take about a week to make because you get the like sequencing of the mRNA and you have a computer generate it from there. Traditional vaccines are hazardous for the people making them because they're so exposed to these viruses the entire time that they're making them. But for mRNA vaccines, we've talked about it, that's not how it happens because the actual virus isn't present while they're making the vaccines. Traditional vaccines take longer to address new concerns because you have to do the entire process. We talked last week about how flu vaccines, it's kind of a guessing game because you just have to guess like what strains are going to be dominant that year, and then you make the vaccine to fight that one. If you get it wrong, then you can't really like go in and make a new vaccine because by the time you do, it's going to have changed again. So you just do your best. With the mRNA though, if you get it wrong, you can just find out the new DNA sequences and make a new vaccine. It's so versatile, and you don't have to start from scratch every time. Like when you're making a flu vaccine, you start from scratch every time. But with these, you have the codes already for the DNA sequences. And so you can just pump them into the vaccines. It's so cool. And the cooler thing about it is that it works. It has like different exact numbers depending on like what demographic you're questioning the number for, like children versus elderly, men versus women, anyways. But it's like anything, it's not 100% effective, but it's really, they do work. So like, okay, we'll stop talking about these vaccines for now. I'm coming back to it later. Say that you didn't get vaccinated, or that you did get vaccinated and you just have bad luck, and then you get COVID-19. How do you treat it once you've got it? The old standby of don't get it in the first place doesn't work. What do? For the most part, if you get COVID-19, you can just bounce back from it after like a week. Standard recommendations are to take over-the-counter pain meds like acetaminophen or ibuprofen, rest, push fluids, stay away from others. If you have a bad case and you end up in the hospital, like if you have those symptoms that we talked about earlier, the emergency ones, like you have trouble with your memory, you can't breathe, etc. Mayo Clinic says that the typical treatment looks like adding oxygen, maybe given through a tube in the nose. In really severe cases, you might have to have a tube placed in the airway to push air into the lungs. That's called mechanical ventilation. In very severe situations, a machine called an extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, also known as an ECMO, can be used to mimic the functions of the heart and lungs. Medicines for severe COVID-19. Bear with me for a second. These are words I've never seen before. Maybe remdesivir, bars. I will put the name of that drug in the show notes because I actually have no idea how to say it. And there are a couple of other different types of drugs. One of them is a pill, one of them is an injection. There's some that are pills or can be given through an IV. Another option may come from getting blood that's been donated by people who have recovered from COVID-19. This is called convalescent plasma. The blood is processed to remove blood cells, leaving behind a liquid called plasma that has an immune system protein called antibodies. Convalescent plasma with high antibody levels may be used to help people with weakened immune systems recover from COVID-19. So again, the idea is don't get COVID in the first place, but if you do, if you get it like a normal sickness, like my experience with COVID, I never got it until this past summer, like the summer of 2024. You just bed rest, push fluids. I was not eating right. I was like sitting in bed eating like Twinkies, and so that's bad. Don't do that. You should be eating like food with nutritional value. But drink water, rest, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, stuff like that. And if you have those emergent symptoms that we talked about, you should be going to the hospital and they can treat you from there. So all of that talk about the treatments and the symptoms, let's talk a little bit about the history. I will be so honest, I've been researching this for a couple of days now, and it took me back to this time. I was reading this and I was like, oh my gosh, and I remember that happened. And oh my gosh, I remember that happened too. Crazy. So it all started back in 2019 in December in Hubei province in the city of Wuhan in China. A group of patients got sick. It looked like pneumonia, but it doesn't clear up with the standard treatments. A little bit of a side note, I got something in my inbox this morning from the New York Times that was like, hey, the CDC is now leaning towards the lab leak theory. And I was like, crazy that we're still talking about this 5 years later. Anyways, moving on to January of 2020, excuse me. Things started happening really quickly. Chinese officials were made aware of the disease, a fish market in Wuhan was closed down, and some other East Asian countries, including Japan and Thailand, there were confirmed cases within the borders. Towards the end of January 2020, cases were confirmed in California and Arizona. I remember I was at track practice, I think, and I was a freshman in high school, and the cool seniors were gossiping, yeah, and I heard that some guy from ASU, he came back from spring break and now it's in Arizona, and I was like, oh, crazy, but that's not going to impact my life at all. And then I stared into the camera like I'm on The Office because we all know how that went. Anyways, moving on to February of 2020, cases and the death toll started to rise all over the world, and the World Health Organization officially named the disease COVID-19, the coronavirus number 19. In March of 2020, the CDC declared COVID-19 a pandemic after more than 118,000 cases in 114 countries and 4,291 deaths. The U.S. institutes a travel ban, and schools nationwide start shutting down. Social distancing measures are implemented in the U.S. That's, like I said, we went on spring break my freshman year of high school, and we did not go back until August. And when we did go back, it was masks, everything, social distancing in the classrooms. In choir, we would all have to sit 6 feet away from each other so we could pull our masks down and actually be able to sing and hear each other. It was such a crazy time. Jumping forward a little bit to May of 2020, the recorded death toll from COVID-19 in the U.S. surpassed 100,000. In September of that year, the reported death toll from COVID-19 reached more than 1 million worldwide in only 10 months. In December of 2020, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are approved and started rolling out in specific increments in late 2020 and early 2021. I remember when that happened, I was 15 and I was working as a hostess at a restaurant, masks and everything. It was still all in protocol. But I remember that my boss came up to me and she was like, "Hey, did you know that you are eligible to get vaccinated because you work in a restaurant?" And I was like, "Oh, I am actually 15 and you can't have that vaccine yet, but thank you for letting me know." Anyways, moving forward into late January of 2021, there are more than 23 million COVID-19 vaccine doses that have been administered in the United States. That was for essential healthcare workers, people who were working in the food industry, people who were working around people or working around things that people were going to consume. And so they were we really have got to keep those people from getting sick because they are the ones who are going to be giving it to other people. In March of 2021, 2 days after the 1-year anniversary of COVID-19 being declared a pandemic, more than 100 million COVID-19 vaccine doses had been administered in the United States. And just 1 month, a month and a half after that, in April of 2021, that number jumped to 200 million doses that had been administered. In May of 2021, the Pfizer vaccine was approved for use in 12 to 15-year-olds. In November of 2021, jumping forward to the end of that year, the Pfizer vaccine was approved for use in 5 to 11-year-olds. In March of 2022, so now we're jumping ahead in a little bit bigger increments because as time went on, we all remember, it started to be impacting our lives less and less on a day-to-day basis. The mask mandates were being rolled back, the social distancing was being rolled back. In March of 2022, Hawaii was the last state to announce an end to its universal indoor mask mandate. In May of 2022, the recorded number of deaths due to COVID-19 in the United States reached 1 million. So that was 2 years and 2 months after that it had been declared a pandemic. Now, here we are in 2025. I'm skipping over the rest of 2022 and 2023 and 2024 because by and large, we've all gone back to life as normal. It's just another disease that we are living with in our day-to-day lives, and it's kind of like the flu. It's oh, you got the flu, dang it, stay home and rest. Oh, you got COVID, stay home and rest, dang it. So that's that on COVID for this week, Get vaccinated, stay vaccinated, protect yourself. Just because it's not an international global pandemic anymore doesn't mean it's not unpleasant to have still. And so we're going to move into our last section of the day called What's Up in Medicine. And What's Up in Medicine, I've talked about it at length in this episode already, and I'm going to talk about it just a little bit more because it's so cool, is mRNA vaccines. I just think that they are the coolest thing. Oh my gosh. We've talked about the science of how they work, so I'm just going to add in a tiny little bit more details about the diseases that are being worked on so they have mRNA vaccines available for them, because that's just the coolest thing ever. So here from Penn Medicine, I have a list of vaccines, or a list of diseases that mRNA vaccines are being developed for. Get ready for them. I'm just going to list them off at you. The avian bird flu, all coronaviruses, hepatitis, HIV, influenza, malaria, norovirus, tuberculosis. They're working on them for some cancers. Last week we talked about how vaccines are being developed for cancers, and I just think that's also really cool. There's mRNA vaccines are being developed for treatment of food and environmental allergies, for cystic fibrosis and sickle cell anemia, for heart attacks and strokes, for heart failure, for therapies, and for neurodevelopmental disorders. These things, there's like no limit to how much that they can do, and I just think it is one of the coolest things that I've ever read. There have been Nobel Prize laureates for the mRNA sciences. I'm going to read a passage here from Penn Medicine. Caitlin Carrico, PhD, and Drew Weissman, MD and PhD, invented the messenger mRNA technology that serves as the foundation of the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccines. These scientists received the world's most prestigious awards for their discovery, including the Nobel Prize in Medicine, the Lasker-DeBakey Clinical Medical Research Award, and the Breakthrough Prize and the Albany Medical Center Prize in Medicine and Biomedical Research. So, that is pretty much going to conclude the episode for today. I hope you learned something. I hope it wasn't too traumatic to walk on down memory lane and think about all of the many, many, many months and many hours that we spent in COVID, watching silly true crime documentaries. And I think I was taking intro to theater at that point, so that's what was taking up my time. Anyways, I hope that everybody has a great week, and I'm going to leave you with the kickoff for the Chiefs-Bills game is going to happen here in about 4 minutes. And guys, if the Chiefs lose today, I'm going to crash out in like a very real way. So I'm going to leave you with that. I hope that everybody has a great week.